The Chicago sky was a violent masterpiece, a canvas of bruised purple and bleeding orange that reflected off the million windows of the Apex Tower. For Samuel Miller, this majestic sunset was merely a time card punch, the signal that the daytime gods of commerce were retreating to their suburban kingdoms, leaving him to preside over their silent, hollow domain. At 72, his world had shrunk to the lonely echo of his cleaning cart's squeaky wheel and the chemical tang of industrial-grade disinfectant. He was a ghost in this gleaming machine of progress, a blue-collar specter haunting the halls of the digital age. He'd been with Prime Clean Solutions for 10 long years, ever since the steel mill back in Ohio had closed and taken his pension and his purpose with it. He'd followed his son David to the city after his beloved Eleanor passed, hoping to be a useful grandfather, but instead found himself an invisible janitor. The work was straightforward, but the daily erosion of his dignity felt like a terminal illness. The primary source of this erosion was Bryce Cunningham, the ridiculously young vice president of acquisitions. Bryce moved through the world as if it were his personal property, draped in suits that cost more than Sam's car, and radiating an aura of condescending privilege. He treated Sam less like a human being and more like a Roomba that occasionally got in his way. Tonight, the universe was running on its usual cruel schedule. Sam was carefully mopping the Italian marble outside Bryce's corner office, a vast expanse of polished stone, when the heavy glass door swung open with a force that sent a gust of air-conditioned air into the hallway. "Hey, Pops!" Bryce's voice was a whip-crack of impatience. "Can you not? I've got the delegation from Singapore leaving in 5. They shouldn't have to navigate your personal swamp to get to the elevator. Seriously, pick up the pace. My time is billable, yours isn't." A muscle twitched in Sam's jaw, a tiny rebellion no one would ever see. He offered a curt, practiced nod and began working the mop with a speed that sent a sharp pain through his arthritic shoulder. He'd learned that silence was his only shield. Bryce, oblivious, stood in the doorway, barking into his iPhone, his Bluetooth earpiece blinking like a malevolent blue eye. "No, Chad. It was a complete bust. The numbers were soft. Their projections are a fantasy. A total waste of my afternoon," he brayed. A moment's pause. "And don't even get me started on the Powerball thing. The kid at the newsstand downstairs didn't have change for 100, so I told him to just give me one of those stupid tickets. $1 billion jackpot? Come on, man. You have a better chance of getting struck by lightning while riding a unicorn through a sharknado. That stuff is a tax on people who are bad at math." He paused again, his gaze sweeping the hallway until it landed on Sam, who was trying to shrink into the wall. A cruel smirk played on Bryce's lips. "It's a tax on desperation," he continued into the phone, his voice now loud and performative. "For people with no hustle, no drive. People who think a magic piece of paper is going to fall from the sky and solve all their problems instead of just putting in the work. You get what I'm saying? It's a loser's game." The words were like tiny shards of glass embedding themselves in Sam's skin. He didn't play the lottery, viewing it as a fool's errand when every dollar was a soldier in the war against bills. But Bryce's casual cruelty was a blanket indictment of everyone Sam had ever known. The factory workers, the waitresses, the truck drivers. The people who did put in the work every single day for a fraction of what this kid made in an hour. Bryce ended his call, pocketed his phone, and strode back to his desk, a vast plain of polished obsidian. After a moment of rummaging, he produced the lottery ticket. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, as if it were a dead cockroach. Then, with a theatrical grimace of disgust, he crumpled it into a tight ball. He turned, met Sam's eyes with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt, and with a lazy, underhand toss, threw the ticket into the gleaming chrome wastebasket. "Right where it belongs," Bryce muttered, the words carrying perfectly in the quiet hall. "Garbage." With a final, dismissive snort, he grabbed a briefcase that looked like it was woven from money itself, marched across the still damp floor, leaving perfect imprints of his expensive shoes, and disappeared into the hushed sanctuary of the executive elevator. The doors slid shut, leaving behind the faint scent of sandalwood and a thick, suffocating cloud of humiliation. Sam let out a long, slow breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He straightened his aching back and pushed his squeaking cart toward the office of Bryce Cunningham. It was his job to take out the trash. The apex tower, at midnight, was a city unto itself, a silent vertical necropolis. The frenetic energy of the day had bled out, replaced by the low, constant hum of servers and HVAC systems, the building's mechanical heartbeat. The only human sound was the soft, rhythmic swish and drag of Sam's mop, a lonely whisper in the cathedral of capitalism. His shift was nearly complete, a small constellation of tied-off trash bags loaded onto his cart. Only one office remained, the corner suite, the lion's den. Stepping inside, Sam was hit by the familiar scent of the place, an arrogant cocktail of stale espresso, expensive cologne, and something that smelled like burnt ambition. He moved past the leather guest chairs to the imposing obsidian desk, a monument to a life so far removed from his own, it might as well have been on another planet. With the practiced, weary efficiency of a man who has performed the same task 10,000 times, he reached for the chrome wastebasket. He pulled out the plastic liner, twisting the top to tie a knot. But as he lifted the bag, a sliver of color caught his eye through the translucent gray plastic. Yellow and blue. The lottery ticket. Bryce's words, sharp and venomous, echoed in the silent room. Tax on desperation. Loser's game. Garbage. An impulse, sharp and sudden, made him pause. He set the bag down on the plush carpet. His fingers, gnarled and stiff from a lifetime of manual labor, fumbled for a moment before untying the knot. The world of Bryce Cunningham was a world of things. Expensive, disposable things. But Sam came from a world where nothing was wasted. He reached in, his hand brushing against a cold, half-empty can of sparkling water and a discarded printout of stock figures, before closing around the crumpled ball of paper. He pulled it out and smoothed it flat on the corner of Bryce's desk. It was just a Powerball ticket, a simple grid of numbers, a barcode, a logo. So why did it feel like it was vibrating with a strange energy in his hand? On another impulse, more dangerous than the first, he sank into Bryce's throne-like executive chair. The supple Italian leather sighed under his weight, a sound of pure luxury. For the first time in his decade of service, he allowed himself this transgression, this brief moment of occupying the seat of power. He stared out the window at the glittering expanse of Chicago, a sea of lights that had always seemed so distant and alien. He held the ticket up, the light from the desk lamp illuminating the numbers. What if? The thought was a spark in the darkness of his mind. He quickly tried to extinguish it. Don't be a fool, Sam. The kid was right. It's a fantasy. But the spark had already caught. A worm of a thought, persistent and powerful, began to burrow into his resolve. He saw, with perfect clarity, his granddaughter Lily's face, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to fix her broken glasses with a piece of tape. He heard his son David's voice on the phone last Sunday, tight with a stress he was trying to hide, talking about the rising cost of Lily's asthma medication and the threat of the bank foreclosing on their small house. He felt the familiar grinding ache in his own knees, an ache he could dull with a new medication his doctor had prescribed, a medication that sat unpurchased at the pharmacy because it cost $400 a month. What was the right thing to do? He could almost hear Eleanor's voice, a memory as warm and real as her hand in his. Honesty is all we have, Sammy. It's the one thing they can't take from you. And his gut, his moral compass for 72 years, agreed. This was Bryce's property. But then another voice, a pragmatic, weary voice he didn't recognize as his own, argued back. Bryce hadn't lost it. He had renounced it. He had judged it, condemned it, and cast it into the filth. It wasn't an item of value that had slipped from a pocket. It was refuse, declared as such by its owner. The internal debate was a silent, raging storm. He was caught between a lifetime of ingrained integrity and the crushing, immediate needs of the people he loved most in the world. He stood up, his decision solidifying like setting concrete. He would be honest. He would give the man one more chance to claim his property. Tomorrow, he would stand before Bryce Cunningham, hold out this flimsy piece of paper, and do the right thing, the Eleanor thing. Let the boy laugh in his face again. Let him spew his casual venom. Sam's conscience, the only real treasure he had left, would be clean. He carefully, almost reverently, folded the ticket and tucked it deep into the breast pocket of his thin work jacket, a fragile $20 question mark resting against his weary heart. The next morning, the fluorescent lights of the 48th floor seemed to buzz with a special intensity, each one a spotlight on Sam's anxiety. He had clocked out of his own shift, but lingered, a gray ghost in the morning rush. The lottery ticket in his pocket felt like a small, hot stone. He stood near the executive suites, a small, still island in a turbulent river of ambition. Men and women half his age, radiating confidence and the scent of expensive coffee, flowed past him, their eyes focused on phones, tablets, and futures that did not include him. He was invisible, a part of the building's infrastructure, as unremarkable as a smoke detector. At precisely 9:15, the confident, rapid-fire click of expensive Italian shoes on marble announced Bryce's arrival. He was a man in motion, power-walking while simultaneously dictating a memo into his phone, his face a mask of predatory focus. He was on a collision course with Sam, and didn't even seem to notice until the last second. "Whoa, watch it, Pops!" Bryce snapped, executing a neat sidestep without breaking his stride. "This is a corridor, not a retirement home lounge. Find a corner to lurk in. You're a workplace hazard." "Mr. Cunningham, sir, if I could have just a moment," Sam began, his voice hoarse with a mixture of nerves and indignation. He held out his hand, the carefully smoothed-out ticket resting on his palm like a humble offering. You threw this away last night. I found it when I was cleaning. The drawing is today. I thought you should have it back." Bryce stopped. He finally tore his gaze from his screen, his eyes flicking from the ticket to Sam's earnest, wrinkled face. A flicker of confusion crossed his features, which then morphed into a slow, incredulous smirk. The smirk bloomed into a full-throated, braying laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated derision that echoed down the polished hall. Several passing employees, sharks sensing blood in the water, slowed their pace to watch the unfolding spectacle. "Are you for real?" Bryce guffawed, shaking his head in theatrical disbelief. He turned to a couple of his junior analysts, who were now openly grinning. "Get a load of this guy. He actually went dumpster diving for my losing lottery ticket. Man, that's a new level of desperate I didn't even know existed." He turned his full, condescending attention back to Sam, his eyes twinkling with cruel amusement. "I appreciate the, diligence, I guess. But like I told my buddy Chad, it's garbage. Do you understand the concept of garbage?" "But it could be the winner," Sam insisted, his voice barely a whisper. He could feel the heat rising in his face, a burning tide of humiliation under the dozen pairs of curious eyes. The laughter redoubled. Bryce gestured expansively, playing to his audience. "The winner! Oh, that's rich! This guy. He thinks he's returning the golden ticket to Willy Wonka. Look, buddy," he said, his tone shifting to one of mock sincerity. "I make my money with my brain, with multi-million-dollar deals, not by praying to the lottery gods like some kind of peasant. Tell you what, if that pathetic little piece of paper is a winner, I will personally buy you a luxury condo on Mars. First one on the block. How's that for a deal?" He jabbed a dismissive finger at the ticket in Sam's trembling hand. "You know what? Keep it. Seriously, consider it a bonus for your advanced trash sifting services. Go buy yourself a six-pack, a bottle of cheap wine, whatever it is you people drink. My treat." With a final performative wink to his smirking acolytes, Bryce Cunningham swept into his office, the heavy door clicking shut with an air of finality. The audience dispersed, snickering. The hallway returned to its normal, busy hum. But for Sam, a profound silence had fallen. He was left standing alone, an old fool holding a piece of paper, his integrity not just refused, but publicly ridiculed and ground into the dust. The shame was a physical weight, a crushing pressure in his chest that made it hard to breathe. He slowly, mechanically, lowered his hand and tucked the ticket back into the safety of his pocket. His offer had been made. His conscience was clear. Bryce hadn't just rejected the ticket, he had gifted it to Sam in a ceremony of public humiliation. As far as Sam was concerned, the ownership had been officially and irrevocably transferred. It was his now. Sam moved through the rest of his day in a thick fog of shame and fury. The public mockery replayed in his head on a cruel, endless loop. He didn't go to the small, windowless break room in the sub-basement for his lunch, The thought of facing even one of the smirking faces from the hallway was unbearable. Instead, he walked out of the gleaming, climate-controlled bubble of the apex tower and into the raw, blustery reality of a Chicago afternoon. The wind whipped at his thin jacket, but he barely felt the cold. He was numb. His feet, acting on some subconscious autopilot, led him several blocks away, to a slightly grimy 7-Eleven wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat. This was a different world, a world of cracked pavement and survival, a world he understood. He stood outside for what felt like an eternity, watching people in worn-out coats buy sodas and scratch-off tickets, feeling the Powerball ticket in his pocket like a tiny ticking bomb. This was ridiculous. He was an old man letting a young punk's taunts get under his skin. He should just tear the damn thing up, throw it in a sewer grate, and be done with this whole humiliating episode. But he couldn't. A stubborn, defiant part of him, the part that had survived the factory closing and Eleanor's death, needed to know. He had to close the loop. He had to see the final, inevitable zero on the screen just to prove Bryce right, if only to himself. Taking a breath that felt like inhaling dust, he pushed open the glass door, its little bell announcing his entry with a cheerful, inappropriate jingle. The air inside smelled of stale coffee, cleaning fluid, and sugary donuts. A young man with dark, tired eyes and a name tag that read Raj was slouched behind the counter, staring blankly at his phone. "Excuse me," Sam said, his voice so quiet he wasn't sure he'd been heard. He slid the now-creased ticket across the worn laminate counter. Could you check this for me, please?" Raj sighed, the sigh of the profoundly bored, and took the ticket. He held it under the red laser of the lottery terminal. The machine emitted a short, familiar, anticlimactic beep. Raj glanced at his screen with practiced indifference, and then he froze. His entire body went rigid. His eyebrows shot up to his hairline. He blinked once, twice, as if trying to clear a glitch from his vision. He leaned closer to the monitor, his nose almost touching the screen. He snatched the ticket and scanned it again. This time, the machine didn't just beep. It let out a long, continuous, high-pitched electronic wail, a sound so alien and insistent that it seemed to make the very dust motes in the air dance. "Whoa," Raj breathed, his nonchalance instantly vaporized, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Sam's heart, which had been pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs, seemed to drop into his stomach. "Nothing, right? It's a dud," he said, a strange sense of relief mixing with the disappointment. He was already turning to leave, to put this all behind him. Raj's head snapped up, his eyes huge. Mister, you need to sit down or something," he stammered, his voice cracking. This can't be real. This is a joke, right? You're on a prank show?" "What is it?" Sam asked, his own voice now trembling as Raj's panic became infectious. "What did I win? $100? 500? Raj let out a laugh that was more of a strangled gasp. $100? Mister, you didn't just win. You won everything. You won the whole thing. You hit the Powerball, the jackpot, the whole damn thing." The floor of the 7-Eleven seemed to fall away, leaving Sam floating in a dizzying, silent void. The fluorescent lights above began to pulse and swim. The sounds of the street outside, the traffic, the distant sirens, faded into a dull, underwater roar. "The jackpot?" Sam repeated, the word tasting strange and metallic in his mouth. How much is it?" Raj, now trembling himself, fumbled with the small monitor, turning it to face Sam. The number on the screen glowed with an otherworldly luminescence, a string of digits so long, so impossible, it looked like a line of code from a sci-fi movie. $488 million. $488 million. The number didn't register as money. It was an abstract concept, a piece of cosmological data, like the distance to Andromeda. He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white, sure that his knees were about to give out. His entire life had been a meticulous, painful accounting of dollars and cents, of stretching a paycheck, of the brutal arithmetic of what he could and couldn't afford. This number wasn't arithmetic. It was a rupture in the fabric of reality. "You have to sign the back of the ticket right now," Raj was babbling, his voice a frantic, high-pitched buzz of excitement and shock. "And then call the state lottery office. Don't tell anyone." "Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening in my store. A real-life jackpot winner." Sam numbly took the ticket back. His hand was shaking so violently he could barely hold the pen Raj offered him. He managed to scribble a jagged, almost illegible signature on the back. He muttered a dazed, "Thank you," and stumbled out of the store, back into a world that now looked completely different. The sunlight was too bright, the colors too vivid. He walked blindly, a ghost in a new dimension, the city a blur of motion around him. The only thing he could see, seared onto the back of his eyelids like a brand, was that impossible number, and the only thing he could hear was the echo of Bryce Cunningham's voice, dripping with the casual cruelty of a god. "If that pathetic little piece of paper is a winner, I will personally buy you a luxury condo on Mars." Sam's legs, operating on a long-forgotten muscle memory, carried him to a small, quiet park nestled between the steel and glass canyons of the Loop. He found a weathered wooden bench under the sprawling branches of an old oak tree, a place where he and Eleanor had shared a thermos of coffee on a rare, happy Sunday afternoon decades ago. He sank onto the bench, the physical reality of the wood a grounding force in his swirling vortex of shock. The winning ticket, tucked safely in his inner pocket, felt less like paper and more like a block of uranium, humming with a terrifying, world-altering power. $488 million. He closed his eyes and forced himself to take a long, shuddering breath, then another. The first coherent thought that pierced the fog was not of himself, but of Lily. He saw her face, not with broken glasses, but with a smile so wide it crinkled her eyes. He could get her the best doctors, the best care, set up a college fund that would guarantee her a future free from the struggles that had defined his life and his son's. He thought of David, and the crushing weight of his mortgage and medical debt simply vanishing, lifted from his shoulders like a physical burden. He could give his son the one thing he'd never had: peace of mind. For himself, he could finally afford a life of quiet dignity, a life without the constant grinding ache in his joints and the deeper ache of invisibility. He could retire, truly retire, and never again have to smell the cloying scent of industrial-strength floor cleaner. The thought of simply quitting, of taking the money and disappearing into a quiet, anonymous life of comfort, was a siren song. It was so tempting. He allowed himself a moment to fantasize about Bryce Cunningham's reaction when the news inevitably broke, the apoplectic rage, the sputtering disbelief of a man who had literally thrown away a king's ransom. The image was a sweet, dark, satisfying revenge. But as he played it over in his mind, he found it wasn't enough. It felt hollow. Simply vanishing would make him a curiosity, a footnote in a crazy news story about a lucky janitor. After a lifetime of being a footnote, he wanted to write his own chapter. He wanted more than revenge. He wanted justice, poetic and profound. As he sat there, lost in these revolutionary thoughts, two women in business attire sat down on the adjacent bench. He immediately recognized them from the Apex Tower's accounting department. One of them, a kind-faced woman with graying hair named Brenda, always made a point to say a cheerful, "Good morning, Sam," whenever she saw him. They were speaking in the hushed, urgent tones of people discussing office secrets, completely unaware of his presence. "A complete and utter disaster, I'm telling you, Susan," Brenda was saying, shaking her head as she sipped her coffee. "Harrison Cunningham Sr. is desperately trying to offload the company before it implodes. I saw the quarterly reports. They're bleeding cash. Bryce's disruptive strategies have disrupted our three biggest clients right out the door and into the arms of our competitors. The whole firm is leveraged to the hilt with bad debt." "I don't get it. Why doesn't his father just fire him?" Susan asked, unwrapping a sandwich. "A toxic cocktail of nepotism and pride," Brenda sighed, her voice weary. "He can't bring himself to admit that his golden boy, his heir apparent, is a lead weight dragging the whole ship down. Now they're desperately shopping for a buyer, a quiet fire sale. I heard from a friend in legal that they'll sell the controlling interest for pennies on the dollar, just to stop the bleeding and cover the most pressing debts. The crazy thing is, the bones of the company are still good. The infrastructure, the assets, If someone competent took over, they could turn it around in a year. But the reputation is so toxic right now, nobody wants to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Sam sat perfectly still, listening, every word a bolt of lightning striking the fertile ground of his mind. A company on the verge of collapse, a fire sale, a desperate owner, and he, Samuel Miller, the invisible man, the ghost of the 48th floor, now possessed more liquid capital than most small nations. A plan, fully formed and terrifying in its audacity, bloomed in his mind. It was a plan forged in the crucible of 1,000 small humiliations and fueled by a sudden, cosmic reversal of fortune. He wouldn't just take the money and run. He wouldn't just savor a private, petty revenge. He would do something far more radical. He would return to the Apex Tower, not with a mop and a bucket, but as the one who signed the checks. He stood up from the bench, his stooped shoulders straightening, the chronic ache in his back momentarily forgotten. The timid, defeated look that had settled in his eyes over the past decade was gone, replaced by a glint of cold, hard steel. "Piece of paper is a winner. I will personally buy you a luxury condo on Mars." And he would sit across a vast mahogany desk from Bryce Cunningham, not as an old man to be pitied or mocked, but as his new boss. And then, and only then, would justice be truly, poetically, and devastatingly served. The following 2 weeks were a surreal whirlwind, a disorienting plunge into a world Sam never knew existed. His first action was to follow the lottery's instructions and contact a top-tier law firm. He walked into the opulent, whisper-quiet lobby of Vance, Adler and Croft, a 72-year-old man in a worn coat and scuffed shoes, feeling like an intruder. The receptionist's polite smile was tight with skepticism until he was ushered into a conference room and, with trembling hands, presented the signed, winning ticket to a senior partner named Catherine Vance. Catherine, a woman in her late 40s with eyes that seemed to see everything and a demeanor of unshakable calm, examined the ticket, then looked at Sam. The polite mask didn't change, but her focus intensified. She listened to his incredible story without a flicker of surprise, as if jackpot-winning janitors were a regular occurrence. But when he laid out his audacious plan, not just to claim the money, but to use a portion of it to acquire a controlling interest in Apex Global Investments, a gleam of something sharp and appreciative appeared in her eyes. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice as smooth and cool as the marble table between them, "this is unconventional. I must admit, it's one of the more interesting proposals I've heard this year. But I like it. It has a certain symmetry." She laid out the strategy with swift, surgical precision. "My team will handle the prize claim through a meticulously structured blind trust. Your name will be completely insulated from the public record. Simultaneously, we will begin the due diligence for the acquisition. We will create a new shell corporation, something innocuous, like Midwest Holdings Group, to act as the purchasing entity. Mr. Harrison Cunningham Sr. will be negotiating with a faceless fund, desperate for a lifeline. He will never know who is on the other side of the table until the moment you choose to reveal yourself." While Catherine's army of lawyers and accountants moved with the silent, deadly efficiency of a special forces unit, Sam embarked on a personal transformation. He submitted his resignation to Prime Clean Solutions, citing vague but serious-sounding health reasons, an explanation that was accepted with bureaucratic indifference. Then, armed with a temporary platinum-level credit card from his new financial advisors, he did something he had never done in his life. He walked into one of the glittering, intimidating menswear boutiques on the Magnificent Mile. The young, impossibly handsome salesman in a suit tighter than a sausage casing eyed him with a mixture of pity and annoyance, clearly about to direct him to a less prestigious establishment. That is, until Sam said, in a quiet but firm voice, "I need 3 of your finest business suits. Everything that goes with them. Money is not a concern." The salesman's entire demeanor shifted in a nanosecond, his condescension melting away into fawning obsequiousness. Sam spent the afternoon being measured and fitted. He bought 3 suits, charcoal, navy, and black, all in the finest Italian wool. He bought a dozen silk ties, shirts of Egyptian cotton, and handmade English leather shoes that cost more than his first car. He topped it all off with a dark cashmere overcoat that felt like woven air. A subsequent visit to a top stylist on Rush Street replaced his simple, neat haircut with something more sophisticated and commanding. When he finally looked at his full-length reflection in the three-way mirror, he didn't recognize the man staring back. The stooped shoulders were gone, forced into a confident posture by the suit's expert tailoring. The weary, apologetic look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet gravity. He wasn't Sam the janitor anymore. He was Mr. Samuel Miller, a man of substance, a man of power. The clothes felt like a costume, an elaborate disguise, but he knew they were his new uniform, the necessary armor for the battle that lay ahead. 10 days later, as he was still getting used to the weight of a Rolex on his wrist, a purchase Catherine had insisted on for verisimilitude, she called him. "It's done, Mr. Miller," she said, and for the first time he heard a note of genuine triumph in her voice. "The wire transfers are complete. The deal is signed, as of 9 a.m. This morning, Midwest Holdings Group, of which you are the sole and silent proprietor, owns a 75% controlling interest in Apex Global Investments. Harrison Cunningham Sr. is off to his retirement villa in the Caymans, ecstatic that he thinks he just dodged a bullet. The board will be notified of the change in ownership by an official memo within the hour. What are your instructions?" Sam took a deep, steadying breath. The fine wool of his new suit jacket felt solid and real under his hand. The moment he had been replaying in his mind for 10 days had finally arrived. "Schedule a meeting for me with the Vice President of Acquisitions, Mr. Bryce Cunningham," he said, his voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand. "Tomorrow, 11 a.m. sharp, in the CEO's office." A tsunami of pure, unadulterated panic ripped through the plushly carpeted floors of Apex Global Investments. An urgent, all-caps email from the outgoing board had landed in every inbox like a bomb, confirming the whispered rumors. The company had been sold. A mysterious, unknown entity, a faceless holding group from the heartland, was the new majority owner. The air, normally humming with the quiet confidence of money being made, was now thick with the electric tang of fear. Who were these people? Would there be layoffs? Would entire departments be purged? Would heads roll? Only Bryce Cunningham seemed immune to the spreading contagion of anxiety. He strode through the office like a Roman general, projecting an aura of unassailable confidence. He saw this not as a threat, but as a glorious, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. His father, with his old-fashioned ideas, was out. A new power was in. This was his moment to shine, to demonstrate his indispensable value, to dazzle the new owners with his forward-thinking brilliance, and secure his rightful place at the top. He spent the morning firing off emails to his terrified team about synergizing with new leadership and embracing a paradigm of dynamic, disruptive change, all while secretly polishing a self-aggrandizing speech he planned to deliver to his new, faceless boss. He was already picturing himself in the CEO's chair. The knock on his office door came at precisely 10:30. It was his executive assistant, Janitor, a quiet, efficient woman in her 50s, who had weathered years of his casual condescension and unreasonable demands with a placid, unreadable expression. "Mr. Cunningham," she said, her voice perfectly neutral, but Bryce, in his heightened state, thought he detected a strange, unfamiliar glint in her eye. "The new owner requests your presence, at 11 o'clock sharp, in the CEO's office on the 50th floor." "Excellent!" Bryce beamed, leaping to his feet and straightening his Hermes tie. "It's about time. They're here already? Perfect. Let them know I'll be right up. I'm eager to get the ball rolling." "Oh, I think they know," Jennifer said softly, turning to leave. As the door closed, Bryce was almost certain he saw the ghost of a smile play on her lips. A flicker of annoyance passed through him. What was her deal? But it was quickly extinguished by the rising tide of his own ambition. At 10:55, Bryce began his triumphal march. He strode down the main corridor, a path he had walked 1,000 times, but today it felt different. It felt like a coronation procession. He offered condescendingly cheerful nods to the pale-faced junior employees who scurried out of his way, their fear a pleasant perfume to him. He was ascending to the summit, to the vast corner office that had been his father's, the seat of ultimate power. He felt brilliant, untouchable, the master of his destiny. The double doors to the CEO's suite were made of dark, imposing oak, designed to intimidate. He paused before them, taking a moment to smooth his hair, run a quick check on his perfect teeth in the reflection of a nearby painting, and compose his features into a mask of keen intelligence and boundless ambition. He knocked twice, a firm, confident rap that announced the arrival of the future. A voice from within, a voice that was calm, low, and disturbingly familiar, replied, "Come in." Bryce frowned for a fleeting second. The voice tickled a distant memory, but he couldn't place it. Shrugging it off as a trick of the acoustics, he pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside, a brilliant 1,000-watt smile already fixed on his face. The game was on. The CEO's office was a shrine to power. It was flooded with the crisp morning light that only the highest floors could command, the entire sprawling city of Chicago laid out like a blueprint beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. A man sat in the massive, high-backed leather throne behind the desk, his form a dark silhouette against the dazzling sky, his back to the door. Bryce closed the heavy oak door behind him, the soft click echoing in the suddenly silent room. "Good morning, sir," Bryce began, his voice booming with the practiced, hearty bonhomie he reserved for his superiors. "Bryce Cunningham, VP of Acquisitions. It's a distinct honor to finally meet you. I've taken the liberty of preparing a brief on several key growth opportunities and undervalued assets that I think you'll find very He stopped mid-sentence, his voice catching in his throat. Slowly, deliberately, with the theatrical gravity of a turning planet, the great leather chair began to rotate. And as it completed its turn, Bryce Cunningham's meticulously constructed world did not just crack, it vaporized. His rehearsed speech, his confident smile, his sense of divine right, all of it evaporated in a single heart-stopping moment of pure, undiluted shock. His brain stuttered, refusing to process the impossible image before him. It was a cognitive dissonance so profound, so reality-bending, that it felt like a physical blow, knocking the very air from his lungs. Sitting in the CEO's chair, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Bryce's last vacation, was Samuel Miller, the janitor, the old man, the ghost he called Pops, the pathetic creature he had publicly humiliated for the crime of digging through his trash. But this was not the stooped, apologetic man from the hallways. This Samuel Miller sat with the unshakable stillness of a mountain, his back ramrod straight, his gnarled but clean hands resting calmly on the polished obsidian surface of the desk. His eyes, clear and steady behind a new pair of distinguished minimalist glasses, held a look of quiet, absolute, and terrifying authority. It was the look of a man who owned the very ground Bryce was standing on. "Sam?" Bryce stammered, the name a ragged puff of air. This had to be a hallucination, a stress-induced nightmare. What are you doing in here? Did the new owner hire you to dust his chair?" A faint, almost sad smile touched the corners of Sam's mouth. It was not a smile of mirth, but of profound cosmic irony. He shook his head slowly. "No, Bryce," he said, his voice as even and soft as it had been in the hallway, yet in the vast, silent office, it landed with the weight of a judge's gavel. "I hired you, or rather, you came with the building." He gestured with one hand toward the supple leather visitor's chair in front of the desk. "Please, sit down." Bryce collapsed into the chair, his legs having ceased to function. He stared, speechless, his mind a frantic scramble of denial and disbelief. "But how? The money, the firm, it's not possible." Sam reached into the breast pocket of his fine suit jacket and produced a sleek silver business card case. With a calm, deliberate motion, he slid one heavy, high-quality card across the vast desk. It stopped directly in front of Bryce. Trembling, Bryce looked down. Embossed in elegant, understated gold lettering were the words, "Samuel Miller, Chairman of the Board, Apex Global Investments." "You told me, I believe, that lottery tickets were a tax on desperation," Sam continued, in that same, devastatingly calm tone. That was shredding Bryce's nerves. It turns out that sometimes desperation pays dividends, especially when someone else is arrogant enough and foolish enough to throw the winning ticket into a trash can. The final piece of the puzzle slammed into place, and the truth hit Bryce with the force of a physical punch to the gut. The ticket, the jackpot, the mockery, his condo on Mars comment. It all coalesced into a single, monstrous, universe-altering fact. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly shade of pale gray. The garbage he'd so casually discarded had been the key to a $500 million kingdom. You bought the company with that ticket? He whispered, his voice a dry rasp. That's right, Sam confirmed with a slight nod. And as you were so keen to point out in those company-wide emails you sent this morning, it's time to embrace a paradigm of dynamic change. I couldn't agree more. And I believe that starts with addressing the incompetent leadership that ran this once great company into the ground. He paused, letting the silence stretch, allowing Bryce to fully marinate in the acidic reality of his own epic downfall. I'm not going to fire you, Bryce. Not yet, Sam said, his voice dropping even lower. That would be too easy. I want you to stay. I want you to have a front row seat as the old man with no hustle rebuilds everything your arrogance almost destroyed. But we will be making some immediate changes to your duties and responsibilities. Sam stood up and walked to the panoramic window, looking down at the city below as if he were a god surveying his creation. My old janitor's closet is in the sub-basement B3. I recall there's a persistently leaky faucet on the main utility sink. I want you to go down there and fix it. You'll find a wrench in the toolbox under the shelf. After you've done that, the floor in the west corridor on the 34th floor needs a thorough mopping. One of the partners spilled a latte. I believe I left a bucket and a fresh mop head in the closet. He turned from the window to face Bryce, his expression utterly unreadable, which was more terrifying than any anger could ever be. You wouldn't want the new owner of the company to slip and fall, would you, Bryce? Get to it. Crushed, humiliated, and utterly broken, his entire identity dismantled in the space of 5 minutes, Bryce could only manage a single, spastic nod. His world had been turned upside down by the very man he had considered less than human. As he numbly stumbled out of the office, a ghost in his own life, Sam remained at the window, his reflection superimposed over the sprawling city. He was no longer a phantom haunting its halls. He was the master of the tower, a quiet, breathing testament to the fact that sometimes justice is not a blind goddess with a sword and scale, but a patient old man with a mop, a bucket, and a very, very long memory.